Welcome to Built with Flutter. I'm your host, Matt Carroll. Today we're going to build the user interface for an app that I call SpacePod. I'll start by showing you what SpacePod is, and then we'll begin composing widgets. Let's take a look at this Figma design. Every week I host a space on X/Twitter with my co-host Ray Lee, and we talk about all things Flutter and Dart. Some weeks we have specific topics. Other weeks we invite general discussion. We bring people up on the stage to join the conversation, and we try to offer an opportunity to the Flutter and Dart community to share what they're working on, what's working well, where Flutter and Dart seem to be lacking, and otherwise generate conversation that can move our community forward. The current issue with spaces on X/Twitter is that there's no way to easily download the audio. So what about all of the people who want to listen after the fact? Well, you can go on to X/Twitter and you can find that space and then listen through Twitter. But there are people who don't want to use Twitter, or they don't have the Twitter app on their phone, and they would prefer to listen to our space as a podcast, which is exactly why we've released our spaces as a podcast called Flutter Spaces. But I got tired of having to go through the process of locating the audio stream and running an FFmpeg command to download it just so I could publish it to a podcast. Enter SpacePod. SpacePod is a tiny little Mac and maybe in the future Windows desktop app, which can locate the audio files or the audio data for a given space that's recorded to X or Twitter, download that locally, and then make a few snips at the beginning or maybe the end so that it's ready to be published as a podcast. Let's take a look at what that means from a user interface perspective. Here in Figma, you see a design for the window, the desktop app window for SpacePod. Primarily, the overall space is taken up by some branding at the top and some extra information links at the bottom. But all the interesting stuff happens in this bottom, let's call it 40% of the window. Let's walk through the flow that the user might see when using this app. At the beginning, we're likely to have some kind of loading display where we do some pre-flight checks. In fact, technically, we're kind of missing one of those already. You'll see over here in the original design of the full window, we have a message here about required tools. It says, we use a headless Chrome browser to locate your X space data. Now, maybe you have those tools installed already and maybe you don't. But if you don't, we need to display this message that says you don't currently have those tools installed. Press the button to the right to download and install the needed tools. And those tools are just a special version of Chrome that we can run in the background without any real user interface. Now, before we even show this message, we need to check if those tools are available on your system, which means we need another one of these loading screens or loading pages, if you want to call it that checks for the tools. But once the tools are installed, we then want this version of the loading page that you see here that says preparing for launch, where we're probably just checking to see if you already have credentials saved for Twitter/X. I'm just going to call it Twitter because that's easier to say. X it's too short. So let's call it Twitter. Down here, we ask you for your Twitter credentials if you haven't entered them already. Now, why do we need your Twitter credentials? Well, the only way for us to locate the audio data is for us to visit the actual Twitter page where your space is hosted. And the only way to access a Twitter page is to actually be logged into Twitter. Otherwise, you hit a login screen. We take your credentials. If you choose to save them, we save them in secure local storage. There's no server here. And then we use those credentials in the headless Chrome browser to access your space data. Once you've entered your credentials, or once you have saved them, we then ask you for the URL of your particular space. There's no universal location for this because you can host many spaces over time. We ask you to provide the URL to your specific space that you'd like to download. Once you've entered that space, you tap the little download button on the right or press enter. And then you see another loading screen where we are downloading the audio from Twitter to a temporary directory on your local file system. At which point, once we've completed the download, we ask you where you would like the final output to be. This says MP3, but should say MP4. Actually, I take that back. I'm sorry. I'm doing too much video editing. MP3 because this is audio only for now. I noticed that Flutter or Twitter Spaces has started to support video. Maybe in the future we'll do some video as well, but up to this point it has all been audio. Once you've selected your destination, we will write the data that we downloaded to your final file destination with your file name. Again, we will have what's probably a very quick loading page for that data transfer, for writing from one file to another. And then we want to give you the opportunity to cut off the beginning of the space if you'd like, because at the beginning, some elevator music is played, and perhaps there's some early conversation you don't really want to capture. It'd be nice to just chop that off while you're dealing with the download. It's possible that at some point, this little editing page here will allow you to slice more than just the beginning, but this is an MVP. We'll give you a chance to slice the beginning and then produce your final audio file. Once you've decided how much of the audio you'd like to keep, we have one final loading page followed by a summary of what has been written. The name of the file, the duration of it, and the size. At that point, you're welcome to exit the app, or you can launch another pod to download another space and do this all over again. There's some other supplemental UI here that deals with crediting us for building this and other things that don't really matter unless or until we release this publicly. I'm still deciding if that's something we're going to do. Certainly, we need to actually make it work before we can talk about releasing. Today, we're going to try to compose as many widgets as we can. Now that we've taken an overview of the UI, let's jump in and start framing out some of the big pieces. Obviously, to start with, we should go ahead and create the layout for the main screen because 2 out of the 3 pieces always remain the same. Let's get that into place and take it from there. Running over here on the right is the Mac desktop app, which I've already created. I've set the window size to what I would like for it to be. I've brought in some fonts. I've copied over some colors from Figma. We'll probably need more colors. I probably didn't find all the colors, but I copied some colors, and we'll go ahead and use those to get started. I also exported the logo here, so that's available to us as well. So let's try to get this actual window roughly looking like what we see here in the Figma design. Here we are in our Flutter code, and here you'll see the scaffold for the main screen. Currently, we've just centered some text. We'll go ahead and we'll start out with a column. Now, the sizing, because the window size is static, we could actually give exact pixel values to each piece of the UI here. But generally, when you're dealing with columns and rows, you should always handle what happens when something shrinks or expands. I think that we would like for the pages to be the part that expands should the window ever become larger. But to be clear, what we're looking for here is a header page, and a footer. For the moment, let's put a spacer in here that takes up all vertical height, and then let's build the footer. Again, I've defined some colors, and we can find them in SpacePod colors. I think we want the inset background for the background of the footer. And I think we would like some padding. Let's try 16 pixels and see how that works. We then would like some text. And what does that text say? It says about SpacePod, about the authors, and support us. About SpacePod, about the authors, and support us. Of course, we'll also want a text style. The color of this text is white. Let's see what the font size should be. Looks like 8 and bold. And the font family interesting. Sorry, you should be font weight. You should be font family. And I also have some fonts in here as well. Let's go to our theme and see where I stored those. I created a fonts class with static access for a few fonts that we're going to use, and Comforta is the one that we are using here. And now we can see that we do have some text down here. It's looking like bold may have bolded it a bit too much as compared to our reference. Our height is pretty close. We could reduce the padding by maybe a couple pixels. But you can see here that our reference text is less bold and there's more spacing between the characters. Let's bring our padding down to 14. Let's get rid of the bold, and let's add a little bit of letter spacing. Okay, the letter spacing is now a little bit much. Let's try 1 pixel. I think that's probably good. I will also add a couple extra spaces around the dots to give us a little more breathing room between the links. Now, these are meant to be links, but again, because we're not worried about the supplemental user interface today, we're just going to leave them as plain text, and we can come back and turn them into clickable text in the future. With that part done at the bottom, let's get this part working at the top. And I do see that our window here is actually a little bit smaller than it should be, but that's okay. We'll allow it to be a little shorter. Let's bring in the logo, let's get the title of SpacePod, and let's get the version number. And for that, we're going to say build header. The header itself will require a column. At the bottom of the header, we know that there is a divider. The height is 1 because we don't want any extra padding around it. And the thickness is 1, which is default, but it doesn't hurt to specify that. Now let's see, do we have a divider color in our theme? Here we have a surface divider. By the way, we also have a surface color, which is just white, which is the default, but it wouldn't hurt for us to come in here and say background color of the scaffold is the surface color. The color of our divider is then spacepod colors dot surface divider. And that's probably sitting all the way up at the top. Let's see what happens if we add some height. Now you see the divider is right here. But we don't need to explicitly define the height. We just need to put the text in there and the version and some spacing in between. We do want, however, spacing above the logo. Let's see what that is. It's looking to be about 50. Do 50 pixels of height. And then we will say image.asset. And under the assets directory, we have images, logo, PNG. And that probably cannot be a const, so now we have to remove the const. We will set the cross-axis alignment of the column to center. We will add more const to the other widgets. Let's save, and there is our logo. And it is quite blurry. I think the blurriness is something that I'll have to address in the future. It shouldn't be blurry. But again, we'll leave it as is, and we'll deal with that in the future. Below that logo is about 20 pixels of space. And then we have the title. As for the color here, I think we want page title, spacepod colors, page title. Font family is, again, Comforta. Font size, let's go find out. Looks like 34. And then there's quite a bit of letter spacing here. Let's start at 8 and see what that gets us. Okay, not nearly enough letter spacing and too bold. So font weight, we're going to go down to, let's try 200. Still too bold. 100. That's about as light as we can get it. I'm not sure why Flutter isn't able to make that font lighter, as light as Figma. But that's the best we can do. Let's bring the letter spacing to 16. Still not enough. Let's go 32. And that's actually more than the design. But I'm not unhappy with that. We can keep that. That's fine. And then spacing between the title and the version number is 34 pixels. For now, we're going to hard code the version. And in the case of the version number, we want Phi Romano. And what size do we want it to be? We want it to be 12 medium boldness with a little bit of added letter spacing, and the color is going to be all C's. What did I say for the font size? I said 12. And then font weight, probably a 500 there for medium. And there's our version. Unfortunately, it does not seem to be loading Fira. Let's see what's in the pub spec. There's Fira Mono, asset, fonts, Fira Mono, regular, medium, bold, all TTFs. I think I encoded it with the name Fira Mono. Is that what I just said? Yes, Fira Mono, no spaces. Hot restart. Still doesn't seem like it's using the correct font. Let's make it really big and see what it looks like. Let's try to match the 0 character. So perhaps that's the right font. Perhaps we just need to separate the letter spacing a bit. And again, what size did I say that font was? I keep forgetting. 12. 12, okay. And then letter spacing, let's try 4 pixels. Let's try bringing the weight down to the regular weight. I think that looks better. I don't know why we're seeing different weights between Figma and Flutter here with fonts, but so be it. We'll work around it. Now the spacing between the version and the divider is about 15. We'll go 14 just to keep even numbers. And now we have the layout of the header. Again, blurry logo, unfortunately, have to deal with that later. Now, where does this version number come from? We can use the build version package to automatically copy our PubSpec application version number into source code so that we can display it in the app. And the way it works is like this. Once we've added this package as a dev dependency, we run build runner, and then this file, lib source version, is automatically generated with the version number from our PubSpec. All we need to remember to do is every time we create a new release, we need to run dart pub run build runner build first. Again, this package is called build version. I'll come back to our code. I will say Flutter pub add, I think it's the dev flag, and then we will say build version. And with that, let's look at our pub spec. Under dev dependencies, here's our build version. Now under lib, notice that we don't have any source directory at all. Let's see what happens when we say dart run build runner build. I guess technically in a Flutter project, we can say Flutter run build runner build. Build runner not found. That's a fair point. We were warned about that, and I didn't pay attention. We want build runner added to our dev dependencies as well. Now we have build runner. Now let's say Flutter run build runner build. Target build runner still not found. Let me make sure I'm not being dumb again. So pub is still, we all forget the structure of these commands. It needs to be Dart pub or Flutter pub. It's a subcommand of pub. Okay, now it's done. Now we have a source directory, and now we have version, which then allows us to come back in here to version and say package version. Now it's still telling us that we can make it const, and that's because the package version is generated as a const. But let's save that. And now we see it says 0.1.0 for our version, and that's because in our pub spec, we are version 0.1.0. Now we let the users know at all times what version they're running so they can report bugs against a specific version. Okay. Now we have our header and we have our footer. It's time to build the page. And we want the page to be expanded. We want it to take up all remaining height. But what goes in the page? Well, we're going to kind of build, I think, some one-off pages just to get the widgets composed, and then we'll put those pages together into a flow. For now, I think we'd like something called a loading page. And I think we'd like the loading page to be able to take a title, like preparing for launch. Where should we package that? We'll create a features directory, and for now, we'll just put it at the top level. I'm sure we'll repackage this later. And this will be loading page. And we would like, it can actually probably be stateless. Let's see, loading page. And we're going to take a title. And then we're going to return a column with a spacer at the top, a spacer at the bottom. Let's come back here. Then we want this loading indicator. We'll get to that second. First, let's get the preparing for launch title. And then let's see if I already have this defined under SpacePod text styles. There's page title. Let's see how that works out for us. Come back to main screen. We need to import that package, save. And now here's our preparing for launch. We want to make it all uppercase. Let's see how it looks at that point. I don't recall if that is something we can do on the text widget itself, or the text style. Let's see. Okay, it's not on the text widget. How about on text style? Do we have a transform? No. Okay. Well, there might be a place where we can make it all uppercase somewhere in styles or somewhere in the text widget, but for now, the easiest route is to just explicitly make it uppercase as a string. Now we have preparing for launch, which looks very similar to our preparing for launch up here. The one in our actual app has a bit more letter spacing, but I actually think it looks a bit better that way. Now we need to get the loading indicator. And let's check first. We have about 20 pixels of vertical space, and then this larger circle is, let's call it 54 pixels in diameter. So first, 20 pixels of space. And then we want a container with, what did I say, 50? And we want to use the inset color, inset background. There's our little circle. Now, I think we want to push all of this up a little bit. I think it's a little too far down vertically. So let's add a little bit more space down below. Let's try 24 pixels. I think that looks better. Now, inside of this container, we want a loading indicator. And I don't think this circle-based loading indicator is built into Flutter, but let's not take the time today to build it. I can come back and build that later. Let's instead just use a Cupertino loading indicator. Activity indicator, I guess is what it's called. Let's see how that looks. Okay, it's there, but it's black by default, so we would like the colors to be white. And there's our little indicator. Again, I don't think that looks as good as the one that I put in the design, but no need for us to spend the time to build that animation today. We can do that at another time. I'm also going to change my mind a little bit down here. I'm going to go down to 16 pixels, which I think maybe pulling it down a little bit is better. Okay, and just like that, we have a general purpose loading page. Now we know that we want some initial flow that checks for these required Chrome tools. Let's see what we can do about that. Under Features, let's create a new file, and we will call this Check for Chrome Flow. Stateful widget, check for Chrome Flow. And in this flow, we will have two steps. Checking for Chrome and prompt for Chrome. Actually, I take that back. If we're going to prompt to download the Chrome tools, we also need downloading Chrome. Our flow will then have a step which begins at checking for Chrome. Our build method will be entirely based on the particular step. Checking for Chrome, we're going to return a loading page whose title is, let's see, we'll call it Running Pre-Flight Checks. downloading tools, and then the question is what we want in this prompt for Chrome, and that page needs to be this one here with this inset area with some text. Let's go create that one. That page is specific to this flow, so we can create it privately. We can create a stateless widget, which is prompt for tools page. We can return the prompt for tools page. We're going to say on install pressed, download Chrome. Neither of those things exist yet. So up here, we're going to have download Chrome as an async method, which we need to implement. And then down here, we need to take a void callback for on install pressed, which will be required. Okay, you should be semicolons. We don't need the key. Okay. Now let's come back to the main screen, and instead of returning a loading page, let's return the check for Chrome flow. Let's save that. Let's do a hot restart. Running pre-flight checks as we expected, but now we need to actually run the pre-flight checks. In check for Chrome flow state, let's create an init state method, and let's say check for Chrome. This is where we will begin to make use of some infrastructure that my Flutter Bounty Hunters teammate, Angelo, has already built for us. In theory, the code should already exist for us to check for Chrome. If we come into infrastructure, let's see, we have FFmpeg and we have X. Let's see if X happens to include that. All right, under X space Finder, we do have our Chrome tools available. It's an async. Let's come back to our flow. We will say await. Actually, I suppose we can instantiate this. We can say final space Finder equals X space Finder. And then down here, when we check for Chrome, we can say space Finder, are Chrome tools available? Now, if for some reason we're not already mounted, we don't want to do anything. We want to bail out. But now we want to check whether Chrome tools are available. And we will say set state step equals, and actually it's not just the step. There are two things that we want to happen here. So what we actually want to say is if not is Chrome available, only in that case do we want to set the step equal to step prompt. But if they are available, this flow is actually completely done doing its job. And we can say void callback on Chrome or on Chrome install complete. That's not quite true because maybe it's already installed. On Chrome ready. How about that? That covers both cases. Required on Chrome ready. And in that case, actually here we can say is Chrome available widget dot on Chrome ready and then return. And the only way that we fall down here is if it's not ready, and then we prompt for Chrome. Adding that new property to the widget now requires that I pass something right here. For now, it will be empty. Let's see, got to get rid of the const because of the inline declaration. Okay. Back here in our check for Chrome, all of that's fine. We can also now implement download Chrome. We can say Space Finder, download Chrome tools. We do eventually want some error reporting for this, but for now, we will say if result code is not equal to, and let's see where the error codes are defined. Chrome error, download error codes. That's probably what we want. For now, we're going to throw an exception. Failed to download Chrome tools, error code, result code. Otherwise, it must be a success. Now, again, before we do anything, we don't want to alter the UI if we're not mounted, but then we can say widget on Chrome ready, because it is. We've downloaded it and it's available. Let's look down here again. So when we first start the widget, we're checking for Chrome. When that's done, we prompt for Chrome, then, which causes us to download, and then we download the tools. I'm going to put a print statement here so we can see when Chrome is ready. I don't know if I already have it or not. Hot restart. Okay, so that placeholder is there. This placeholder here is showing up because at the moment, our prompt for tools is just a placeholder. What this means is that even though I have Chrome installed and even though I have Chrome driver, apparently I don't have this tool installed to the place that we expect or want to put it, which is good because that means we can see the user interface that we need to build here. Here's roughly what we want when prompting to install Chrome tools. Let's see what our padding is here. 34 horizontal. Let's call it, oh, now it says 36. Let's do 36 all. And then we would like a decorated box. The color is going to be inset background, and the border radius, let's find out. The border radius is 33. We'll call it 32 to be even. Okay, circular is not const. Okay, and we don't see anything because it's taking up minimal space, not maximal space. All right, there we are. There's our inset background. Now inside of that, in the design, I have the left and right padding as different. I don't think there's any reason to do that. So let's set both sides to 40 pixels. And let's see what the vertical should be. 18. we're going to need a row and a column, a row for the horizontal breakdown and then a column for the two pieces of text. We'll start with the row. That's where the text will go. Then we want, let's call it 36 pixels of space. And then we want a text button, I think. What did I call it? I say install. Install. Here's the beginning of that. Here's our install button. Now let's see, does text button take an icon? It looks like we're going to have to bring the icon ourselves. The text button will itself have a row with an icon. And I really would have thought that the Chrome logo would be available in the material icons. Well, okay, I'll have to bring that down separately, but until then, we'll just use a random icon. Let's save that. Now the icon is added. Looks like we'd probably like the size to be smaller. Let's try 18. Let's try 20. Sized box with a width of 8. Now we want the colors to be different on that button. We want them initially to be this gray color. We will style the text button. For some reason, I'm not getting any code hinting. Okay, foreground color. All right. That's decent for now. Okay. Then in the column, we're going to want two text widgets. One is going to say required tools. And the other is going to say this longer thing. This title is size 14 bold SF Pro. And then the other text is 12 bold SF Pro and is this color. Okay. Let's see. We can probably reduce this padding a little bit, but first let's also get this left aligned. Now it's left aligned. We'll reduce this down to 24 pixels. How about 16? That's probably fine. Now, it is possible that at some point this text no longer fits, in which case we just want to truncate it. It's not great in general to truncate text, but for this very specific app, in the few places it's expected to be used right now, I think that's fine. we will ellipsize it. Oh, but that's going to... That's interesting that it applies just one line. Interesting. So it looks like Flutter's truncation behavior only operates when the number of lines are set, or possibly only one single line. I don't think that's real great. What if we define the overflow on the entire text field, or entire text widget? Nope, that still does the same thing. I don't think soft wrap will have an impact, but let's see. Nope. Okay, we're just going to have to let the text possibly overflow because we don't want to truncate it after just one line. In any event, we now need to report the tap on install pressed. Where's that going to go? That's going to go in our button. Okay. And that means that down here in our build method, when we build the prompt and we press install, we're going to download Chrome, which I now see one thing we need to do here is we need to initially go to the downloading Chrome step, save that, do a hot restart to make sure we're all good. And now let's see what happens when we say install. Chrome is now ready. Okay, so now when I hot restart again, we shouldn't be prompted at all. Yep, Chrome is now ready. Okay, so that flow has done its job. There's now a broader flow that we are trying to build up. There's the whole flow. We go from doing the Chrome pre-flight checks to then checking for credentials to then prompting for credentials. I suppose we don't need to build the overall flow yet. We can instead just jump right into the flow for credentials. And we can build it the same way that we just built the check for Chrome flow. We can create a login to X flow. The steps here: check for saved credentials, prompt for credentials, and then validating credentials might be a separate page. We could either validate credentials on this same page, or we could have a separate page. I think for now, we'll use a separate page, and then maybe I'll change that decision later. As in our other flow, we're going to have a step. We're going to return a loading page here, which says preparing for launch. For validating credentials, validating credentials. And then in between, we're going to want something like enter X credentials page. And this is private to this particular flow. So we'll create that widget privately, which for now is just a placeholder. And if we want to test this flow, we need to come back to the main screen, and instead of the check for Chrome flow, we want a enter or what did I call it? Login to X flow. So it says preparing for launch, which is what we expect, preparing for launch. And when we prepare for launch, we need to check to see if we already have credentials saved. Again, very similar to our last flow. Check for saved credentials. We will create a method to do that. We will again create our X space finder. And we want to try to load the credentials. Again, this is a behavior that my team member on the Flutter Bounty Hunters, Angelo, has already created for us. When we load stored credentials, okay, it's nullable. So probably something we need to do here is differentiate between missing credentials versus an error obtaining them. But for now, we will say, if not mounted, we're going to bail. Otherwise, if credentials are not equal to null, we probably should validate them. But for now, we're just going to report success, which we need some way to do that. We'll create a method on credentials obtained, come up to our widget, final void callback on credentials obtained, require that. And then in this case, we will return. Otherwise, if we get down here, it's because we don't have any credentials for the user to log into Twitter/X. And therefore, we will need to say step equals step prompt for credentials. Okay. Save that. Main screen, it wants on credentials obtained user credentials. Hot restart. Now we see a placeholder. And why do we see a placeholder? That's because we checked for credentials. They weren't available. And now we need to collect the credentials from the user. We're right here on the Enter X credentials page. We probably want a callback, and that callback will be a function that is given credentials on credentials submitted. And our goal is to get information into that callback. And once they are submitted, we are going to validate credentials. And now that means we need to create this page. This page is going to be first and foremost a row, and then that row is going to contain 3 pieces and maybe some spacers, and then each one of those 3 pieces is going to have a column. Let's start with the text fields. We want to take up all vertical space on the top and the bottom, and then we're going to want to build a couple text fields, and we want some space in between. How much space? Let's call it 14 pixels. The built-in text field will not be nearly what we want here, but let's start with something. Okay, it's all empty. Why is it all empty? I shouldn't need that. Let's try a hot oh, looks like something went wrong there. Let's try a hot restart. Cannot have unbounded width. We are, let's call it 200 pixels wide. Okay, there we go. There are our 2 text fields. And obviously this, again, is nothing like what we want our actual text fields to look like. At first glance, we might be tempted to try to decorate a single text field into this overall design, but that's very unlikely to work. We don't have enough control over a text field. So really what we want is to remove all the decorations off of text field so that it just creates the part with the hint and the value, and then we'll create the label and we'll create the boundary around it. We'll hard code one of these and then we'll parameterize it. So your X username. And then for the hint, we want @someone. Let's see what our text style is here. Actually, I believe I've already created this SpacePod text styles text field label. And then hint style is SpacePod text styles text field hint. And then the regular style of the value that we type in is text field value. Okay, we're getting somewhere. We want this column to stretch. And let's surround this with a decorated box. The color is going to be the standard inset color. Now, is this actually, I think what we want is a shape decoration because we want what's known as a stadium border shape. And there's our shape. Obviously, we just have some issues around sizing here. We're going to want some padding. Okay, and we're going to have to go ahead and downsize this text field, which is always a process where I have to rediscover every time what all I need to disable. Let's set maybe is dense to true. Okay, now we're much more dense. And now we actually need a little bit of vertical spacing. Let's call it 4 pixels. Okay, and then let's actually get rid of the pad. Let's make it only horizontal. And then we're going to say main axis size min, and we're going to center the column. Okay, well that won't work because I told the decorated box to just take up the available space. So horizontal, let's go 20 pixels horizontal. Vertical, let's drop down to 8 pixels. And then really we just need to get rid of that border. And this is another one of these things that's really annoying to try to get rid of. Because there's border, and then there's focused border, and then there's the error border, and then there's the focused error border. And it makes sense that you can set each one of those individually, but it's really annoying when you try to get rid of all of them. Okay, that's reasonable. I don't like the carrot color because it's a purple that we can barely see. Where are we likely to change that? Cursor color is what they call it. Let's try a bright blue. I think I like that one better. Okay. And now we need to parameterize this a bit. We need the label. We need the hint. And we need to take a callback when it's submitted. Well, actually, that's not true. Instead of a callback, we will take a text editing controller. And the label is going to be label. And the hint is going to be hint. Let me come back up here. The label, what did we say? It's your X username, your X password. And that means we also need to obscure text, possibly. For the password, we do need to obscure the text, and then we need a couple controllers. We always need to dispose of controllers when the widget dies. That way we don't get any memory leaks. Do a hot restart. Okay. Password, you can't see it. Text, you can. All right, we are one step closer. On the left side, we now need access credentials. And why is this needed? We'll call that build title. Main axis alignment will be center, text, access credentials. Yep, and then why is this needed? The text style is going to be SpacePod text styles page title. Oops, put that in the wrong spot. We wanted that right there. And to keep the code order the same as the reading order, I'll move the build title method. Okay, and the reason that we now change the proportion is because this needs to be inside and expanded. All right, there we go. Now, we still need this to be capital letters. And now we need to style this button a bit. The foreground color is going to be this guy. And in fact, let's see, do I already have this in the colors? If not, we should add it because it's used a number of places. There it is, button text. SpacePod colors, button text. That's the color, but what's the size? The size is 8, and it's bold. And what font is it? SF Pro Display. All right. Oh, not sure what that was. Okay, a momentary problem, I guess. And then the padding should be reduced. Okay, vertical should probably be 8, horizontal should be 12, and then we want a little bit of vertical spacing here. Doesn't seem to be applying the vertical padding. Let's make it really big. Oh, there it is. Okay. Not sure how it's calculating it. But okay, that's fine. Back to the design. Now we need something similar over here on the right, except button on top and this save credentials thing. So let's take build title. And we will now create a build continue. This is also SF Pro. This is size 14 and it has a little bit of letter spacing. Let's see how 2 looks. And now we need to use this guy. And there it is. I think I'm happy enough with that button. And then we want a little row. Actually, we can make this a text button as well for the checkbox. Although, actually, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe there's actually a checkbox we should use. Let's see what a checkbox actually looks like. Is it just the checkbox? It's just the checkbox. Do we have a size? I'm not a fan of the fact that we don't seem to have a size. What was the density thing in here? Visual density. What values do you provide? Minimum. That's pretty annoying. Well, reinventing a checkbox is not really something I'm interested in doing right now. So let's see what happens if we do a checkbox list tile. And of course, it's on the opposite side. That's dumb. That's really dumb. Well, this is the world of material widgets. They never do what you want. Maybe we will reinvent the checkbox after all. checkbox button. We said we want this to be a text button, unpressed for right now. Who cares? The child, and here will be a row. I wonder, do we happen to have a checkbox icon? Excellent. For now, we will have you actually just be save credentials button. Save credentials button. And the cross-axis alignment will be center. I don't know why that's expanding. Maybe it's because we need the row main axis size.min. Okay. And then the icon size is going to be like 14. Yep, very small. This is Comforta 8 bold. And the foreground color is going to be this. And the spacing, we'll call it 8 pixels between the icon and the text. And then the row cross-axis alignment is going to be center. It's a little strange that it doesn't actually seem to be vertically centered. That's annoying. Probably having something to do with text layout sizing. Okay. And there is our checkbox. I'm also going to make why is this needed capitalized. I'm also going to adjust the letter spacing. That's better. Save credentials can also use a little bit of letter spacing increase. That's better. Okay. There is essentially our design layout. It's not perfect thanks to some Flutter issues, but we're pretty close. Though the hint text does not seem to be rendering with the correct color. So it should be 97A. Text field hint. There we go. That's what we want there. And then enter X credentials. Future void. Well, so I guess we said a little bit earlier that even though we should validate them now, did I say that we're going to validate them? Yes. So we validate them, but we validate them somewhere else. And that happens when the user presses continue. On pressed, we want to submit credentials. We shouldn't let the user submit if they haven't filled the fields, but we're not going to worry about that right now. We do, however, want to add a Boolean here, should save credentials. Then we're going to take our space finder and we're going to try to log in. If result code is not equal to login result codes.success, we're going to throw an exception. Now, an exception is not the right thing to do here because it's totally reasonable that the user entered incorrect credentials. However, we are not in an error handling place yet. We will say failed to log in to X result, or it's technically an error code at this point. Otherwise, if we have successfully logged into X, then we want to say if should save credentials, then we're going to await space finder, store credentials, and below that, if we're not mounted anymore, we're going to return. Otherwise, we can say on credentials obtained. And actually, that, let's see. But if we don't, we do need to pass them because maybe the user decided not to store them. By the way, when we validate credentials, we also need to show the appropriate step. Validating credentials. And on the main screen, we need to receive the credentials here. Hot restart. Okay. Put in one of my usernames and then say continue. Error 999. Let's see what that's complaining about. Means an unknown error. So it wasn't invalid credentials or password missing. Let's see. Let's see in here where that might come up. Unknown is down here or possibly here. Let's see if that's why. Operation not permitted. Okay, well, this is something that we will have to go look up and we will have to fix this, and then we can continue with our development. So I'll see you when this issue is resolved. And we're back. It turns out that the issue we were dealing with was that the debug version of this app did not turn application sandboxing off. So Apple was preventing us from taking certain actions beyond just the scope of the deployment of this app. Now, if I hot restart after making that change to entitlements, we come back here to credentials and I can put in my username and I can put in my password. Hit continue. Validating credentials. Okay. And then obtained user credentials. That means that through the X Twitter website, we have submitted the credentials and those credentials were accepted, and that happened behind the scenes in an invisible browser window. Let's go back to the design. After we're done with the credentials, we then need to enter the source URL for a space. Let's go ahead and create this little inner flow as well. Here we want to, well, let's maybe think about the bounds of the flow. Maybe that one page is enough for the flow, but really it probably makes more sense to have all three of these in one flow. Enter the source URL, download the audio data. Although I guess those two maybe belong together. Enter the URL, download the data. Then once we select the destination, that could be a separate flow, which then writes the copies the audio data from the cache over to the selected file location. Let's put these two in one flow, and this is going to be the download audio flow then. Here we will create the download audio flow file. We will create a stateful widget, download audio flow. We will create steps. The first one is provide space URL and then download audio. our build method as elsewhere, we will switch on the step. For downloading audio, we have another progress screen or loading page. Transferring data to pod, that's what we want to say there. And then for providing the space URL, we need to create a new page. And I'm sure we will want an on URL provided, which we will then use to call download audio. Let's go ahead and define stub out download audio. And now let's create the page widget. Looking back at the design, we want the title enter source URL, then a text field with a button built in, and then a line below it. We will begin with a column. Above the title is about 32 pixels, and then 50 below. Actually, I take that back. We should just center it. And we'll add a little bit of space on the bottom to push everything up just a bit. But then we said for the title, enter source URL. This will use spacepod text styles dot page title. Then we know we're going to have our text field. Let's see, what's the space between the title and the text field? That's 18. And then 12 between the text field and the text below it. Text field goes there. Okay, and then let's add this line of text down here, which is size 10, bold comforta. Copy that. Actually, probably don't have a style defined for that yet. What size did I say that it was? 10 and bold. How about the color? That might be the inset color, but we'll just set it explicitly. Now, so we can start viewing this. Here, let's finish the API on this widget. We want a function that receives probably a URI, because I think we want it to be valid. And if we parse a URI, we will ensure that it's a valid URI. Okay. Now let's come back to the main screen. We're kind of trying out each little flow as we go. This one's download audio flow. And down here, a semicolon, okay. And now here it is. That sign out button, again, I can come back later and do that. There's nothing interesting there. Let's get the text field in the middle. We know on the login screen, we created a text field. Looking for the build method for that. Build text field. Probably what makes sense is for us to move this into a shared widget. So let me take what we already have here. Let me copy that. In infrastructure, I'm going to create a new file called UI Toolkit. And then I'm going to create, for now, we'll make it stateless. Maybe it'll be stateful later. This is going to be SpacePod text field. Okay, and then it needs to take a label, an optional hint. It's optional now because in general we don't know if we actually want a hint all the time. We need a controller. We will say required this dot controller, required this dot label, and optional this dot hint, and whether or not to obscure the text. Let's now go back to log into X. Let's delete this build method. And then up here in build text field, we will now say SpacePod text field, and the API is interchangeable. However, to support the design of our new page, we do need a space to add an icon button. Coming back here to UI Toolkit, we will take an optional icon data. Though icon data does not encode the size, so perhaps, well, that's fine. We'll try it with a constant size, and we'll call this a submit icon. It's going to be optional. And then let's see where we can add that. Here's padding around the entire internals. We then center a column. I think that probably we want a row right here. And we will make that expanded. And then after that, we will add an icon. Well, we will say if submit icon is not null, then we will display that. Now let's kind of massage that into what we want here. Going back to download audio, we will say SpacePod text field. Space URL to download is the label. The hint text is kind of the beginning of an actual Spaces URL. We don't need to obscure the text. We do want a submit icon. And in this case, at least in the design, we're using a cloud download. This might be the closest one that we have in the material icons. Now we need a text editing controller, and that means we need to change from a stateless widget to a stateful widget. That way we can instantiate a URL controller. And now in dispose, we need to dispose of it. And we will pass the URL controller to the SpacePod text field. Let's save that. Okay, it's on its way. We will add padding to the left and the right. 82 pixels on both sides. Actually, because there's going to be two of these, I think let's just define a max width. And in fact, so that max width, let's call it 530. We can apply that to the text field itself. Save that. Now our width is what we want. And for the icon color, we'll copy this. Now the icon is the right color, and I think that's also even a reasonable size right out of the gate. What we will want to add, however, is a gesture detector. On tap, we want to widget on submit, which doesn't exist yet, but it will. And what's more is that on desktop, we'd like to change the cursor to a tap or kind of click cursor. We will use a mouse region for that and set the cursor to system mouse cursors.click. All right, let's go. There's no widget dot because this is a stateless widget currently, but we want on submit. That's optional because the icon which submits it is optional. Now you'll see we get the little tap cursor over here. We could probably do some hover effects and things like that, but no need to at the moment. Little things like that we can clean up once we get the core functionality done. Okay. Now back to the download audio flow. We have our controller. In this case, we need to also pass on submit, and then we will then say download audio. Actually, we just want to call, on URL provided. So on submit, let's see, submit URL. We'll make that a standalone method. Could have done it inline, but probably easier to read to keep it up here. URI.parse URI controller.text to do handle possibility of invalid URI. And then we will say widget dot on URL provided, and we will pass it. Then back to our steps. Once the URL is provided, we're going to download the audio. The first thing we're going to do in download audio is switch to the next step, which is download audio. We're going to create a space finder. We're going to find playlist URL. That's the first step. There's actually multiple steps to this particular process. We'll pass the URL and we'll bring it back to a string, although I'm not sure that's actually the right way to get it. It might be toString, but there might actually be an explicit value in here. All right, we'll assume toString is good enough. And this returns a tuple. The playlist URL, if we find it, or an error code. We can say final playlist URL or error code. And we need to await that. When we're done, if error code is not equal to find playlist error codes.success, we're going to throw an exception, failed to locate playlist URL at space URL. We're going to then show that URL, and then we're going to say error code. And actually, we should call this result code because maybe it's success. Otherwise, we successfully got the playlist URL, but if we're no longer mounted we don't want to do anything. If we are still mounted with the playlist URL, then I think now we're actually going to switch from the space finder to the tool that we use to download, which is in FFmpeg, because that's what we use to actually download. Here's a download audio from M3U8, downloads the audio to a file, and then returns a reference to that temp file. Okay, FFmpeg space editor. So FFmpeg space editor. Okay, we know it's not null because we didn't get an error code. Let's rename result code to find playlist result code. And this one down here is now download audio result code. And we're going to kind of repeat our pattern here. If download audio result code is not equal to, let's see, FFmpeg. Let's see where the result codes are coming from for those. It looks like maybe this one is just success or failure. Nope, spaces, download codes. That's what we want. Dot success, throw exception, failed to download audio data for space URL. Error code is download audio result code. Otherwise, once again, we're going to check if we're mounted. If we're not mounted, return. If we get down to this point, it means that we have a temporary file, a file in temporary storage, which contains our audio data. That's probably what we want to hand back, because we said that selecting the destination might be a different flow, although it does beg the question as to whether that makes sense. Let's see, select destination. Yeah, we'll stick to that decision for now. I might combine some of these flows into one later on. So this download audio flow, it's going to take a function on audio downloaded. On audio downloaded, and we will pass temp file, which we know is non-null at that point. Coming back to main, on audio downloaded. And we'll see what the path happens to be. Now, that said, we do still need the credentials by the time we get there. So it's now probably finally time to build the overall flow that runs multiple of these back to back to back. We're going to create a space pod flow. And what did we say the steps were so far? First, we want to ensure Chrome tools available. Then we want to collect credentials. And specifically, I guess those are X credentials. And then we want to download space audio. Step equals step.ensure Chrome tools are available. Then we're going to switch on our step. Here we're going to return the check for Chrome flow. On Chrome ready, we're going to move to the next step, which is to collect credentials. For that step, we're going to return our login to X flow. On credentials received, we're going to store those locally in this overall flow. And then we're going to set the step equal to the next one, which is download the audio. Let's save those credentials. And then we're going to return download audio flow, which is the end of our overall flow for now, but we're going to want to pass the credentials. Well, let me see what's going on with those credentials. In our download audio flow, where we just said download audio, we have spacefinder.find playlist URL. Let me see where it's getting the credentials. So it looks like, so I made a little bit of an incorrect assumption here because I hadn't looked at the code in a little while. We're actually retaining state. So we have a concept of being logged in. To make that work, in that case, what we're going to do is we're going to come into our overall SpacePod flow. We're going to have a final space finder. And we're going to pass that to multiple flows. So instead of getting the credentials back here, we're going to say space finder is space finder, and space finder is space finder. And now instead of creating one in each of these flows, we are going to use the one provided to each of those flow widgets. That's for the login, and now for download audio, same thing. We want an X space finder, required this X space finder, and let's get rid of the local one and replace that one call with the one that we've injected. And that means we can also change this method to not take credentials. And it looks like, okay, so that we still need to do. Let's see, when we load the stored credentials, that just returns the credentials. We still need to run login. So in the case where we load the credentials, if the credentials are not null, then we are going to validate credentials, and we want to keep them saved because that's where we got them from in the first place. They were saved. We want to keep them saved. Okay, and then we don't need to pass the credentials there. then on the main screen, we're going to return the overall space pod flow. There's credentials. We actually, okay, we don't need to save credentials locally because they're being saved inside the space finder. And we'll come down here and say print done downloading audio. Temp file path. All right, hot restart, and let's see what happens here. Okay, it wants me to log in. Validating credentials. So that should have gone to the next step, but we need a set state. Now we go to the next step. Okay. And now I need to actually find a URL. So let me pull something up here. Copy link. Okay, I've copied a link. Let me paste it in here. Okay. Here's a URL to an actual space, and let's see what happens. Download. Transferring data to pod. Now, I guess I actually should have output some progress indicators because this is downloading a multi-hour space. Let's go ahead. Let's stop that. Let's come into this flow. First, let's output the playlist URL, successfully located playlist URL. And then in the download audio from M3U8, it takes an on progress callback. So we can say on progress, print, download progress, progress. And let's see what this does. We'll see if we get the playlist URL, and we'll see if we get download progress. Let's see if saving credentials actually works. All right, paste the URL again, download. Okay, and here we go. It's actually going a lot faster than I thought, so we should be able to wait long enough for the download to complete. Okay, done downloading. And supposedly, it's in this directory. Let's copy that. All right, there's two of them. Which one is the new one? The new one is FDEB. FDEB. So let's copy that to just MP4. And then let me find this in Finder. Let's see, we're at library caches. Began as a JavaScript replacement.
So that's where I stand, and that's where I think
Hopefully you could hear that playing through my speakers, but what that means is this file really is the space audio, and we've got almost 2.5 hours of space audio downloaded just like that. Now we'd like to be able to edit the audio a little bit over here, but I think for today we're not going to do that. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to allow for the selection of a destination. We will then do the blast off, which writes from the temp file directly to the destination without any editing. And then we'll see if, I don't know if it's easy to get these metrics. I might do that separate from the video because it might just be a little tedious to format the text for this final screen. But let's try to get the rest of these visuals minus the editing and landing the pod part. Therefore, we're going to create another flow. This is going to be, what should we call this? Create final audio flow. And what are our steps here? We're going to select final destination. We're going to copy audio to final destination. And the copy audio to final destination is another loading page whose title we said is Blast Off. And then we want a private page, select destination path page. And I guess that'll be stateful because we'll need, well, let's try stateless. Because even though this looks like a text field, it's not really a text field. You're not going to type in your path. You're going to tap it and it's going to open a pop-up and then you're going to select a path. But it does look the same as our text field. And so what we can do is come over to our UI toolkit. We can copy the existing implementation of our text field, but we will call this one a SpacePod file chooser. And it looks like that messed with, okay, let me undo that rename since it broke things. SpacePod file chooser. We don't need a controller. We do want a label. In this case, we want the hint to be required. We never need to obscure the text. We do want an icon. Although actually we're going to hard code that icon. So get rid of the controller, get rid of obscure text, get rid of the icon data. This is going to be icons save, and it's always going to be there. We don't need to change the mouse region should actually apply to the whole thing now. Because when the user taps anywhere on this thing, we want to launch a file chooser. Now, where the text field was before, we just want a text, just a text widget. And the style, the text style, is actually going to be the same as the hint style, which I guess is just style. And then decoration, we can get rid of. And then we'll just copy this hint. And instead of on submit, we'll have on pressed. And just to be clear, actually, this isn't itself the chooser. So we're going to call this a button. It's the SpacePod file chooser button. Save. Come back to create final audio. We want the title of select destination. And this is going to be SpacePod text styles dot page title. And then we want a SpacePod file chooser button. The label will be select destination file. And it looks, I forgot that I kept the hint in there. Let's make that configurable after all. What did I call it? Yeah, I called it a hint. Oh, it's because I have const. Okay, and then come back to where we just were, paste in that hint. On pressed, we need to do something, but also that on pressed should be required. And what do we want to do here in the select destination path? We want to take a function which receives, actually, this needs to be stateful after all, because we need to actually pick the path. Launch file picker. And then when we're done with that, we'll call a function that takes a file. Okay, and visually, we want 20 pixels between the title and the button. Okay, now we don't want to have to go download all of the audio again to try out this particular step, visually speaking. Let me, on destination selected. Okay, so what I was saying is we don't want to have to run the whole flow. So we're going to return now to our sampling of just an individual flow. So create final audio flow. And here's what that looks like. Obviously, we have a problem with the vertical alignment, so let's go fix that. In our column, we want the main axis alignment to be center. Okay, now it's pushed too far down, visually speaking. So we'll come and add a sized box with the height of, let's try 48. That's too much. 24. Good enough. Okay. And now we need to launch the file picker. And I actually don't know. we're going to need a package for that because it's going to need to launch the Mac OS picker. So we will say file picker. Let's see what we get. It says it supports Mac OS. Let's give it a try. How do we use it? Await file picker platform. Not sure what that platform's about, but okay. So file _ picker. Let's add that to our project. Let's do Flutter pub add file picker. Oops, I'm in the totally wrong place. I'm still in the temp audio directory. Flutter pub add file picker. Flutter pub get, just to make sure that went through. Okay. Now let's copy the instructions. If we want a single file, it says we should do it this way. File picker, import file picker, picker result. If result is not null, otherwise user canceled. Fine. And then we're going to say widget.onDestination selected. Okay, let's do a hot restart. And there it is. So, but actually, we don't want to pick a file. We want to create a new one. So let's go this way instead. You're the destination file path. Okay, save, hot restart. Okay, fair enough. Works for me. Now let's figure out how we're going to copy the audio to the destination. Let's take in a space finder. Actually, I take that back. At this point, I think what we want is an FFmpeg space editor. And then we can say space editor, finalize edit. We'll also need to take in the temp audio file. And we can say widget temp audio file needs to go to destination. Okay, it wants that as a string. I guess it wants both of those as a string. And then finalize edit returns a result code. If result code is not equal to FFmpeg, let's see, space let's see what result codes it's actually using. Finalize edit codes. throw exception, failed to copy audio from temp file to final destination. The temp file is widget.temp.audiofile.path. Final destination is destination.path. Otherwise, if we're not mounted, do nothing. And if we're still mounted, then that means that we are on final audio. Let's see. For now, I can't think of a great name right now, but on final audio produced is an okay name. Okay, and when we copy, we need to change the step. Set state step equals step dot copy. Okay. Now we can no longer run that easily from main because now it's taking a bunch of properties. Final space editor equals ffmpeg space editor. After we download the audio, we're going to set state step equals step dot edit audio. We need to introduce that step. Edit audio. And then add that switch case down here where we're going to return our new flow, which is, what do we call that? Create final audio flow. And we need to say temp audio file equals temp file. And we need to create a variable for that. Okay. And then we want this guy down here. We'll come back. We'll prove this works, and then we'll try it again. Okay, we're automatically validating credentials. Got to paste in. Oh, I lost the space URL. Need to go back and get the space URL. We're going to download that. And I'll see you back here when the download is done. The download is done. Now let's try to select a destination. Unfortunately, tapping on the button didn't launch the file picker, even though it was just a moment ago. Okay, I had a gesture detector in the wrong place, but now that issue has been resolved. So let's now call this, myspace.mp3. Let's save it, blasting off. Done editing audio. Okay. Here's my space. Determining audio volume. I don't know what that's about. Let me try to open it again. Okay, the audio is there. It's having some kind of problem with the built-in Apple Music app or iTunes or whatever it is. We'll take a closer look at that and see if maybe we need to add something to the code that copies the audio to make sure that all audio apps can tell that it is audio and play it. But otherwise, that process is complete, which means the last thing we want to do here is see if we can create this final page. And for that, I think we can just add a page inside this overall flow. We can say stateless widget done with flow page. Or we could say done done editing audio page. Let's go with the original. Done with flow page. We'll create a step called done. We will say case step done, return done with flow page. And we're going to have an on start another space pressed, in which case we're going to call restart. We're going to have a method in here called restart. And that will be a void callback. And then here we're going to set the step equal to step.done. We're going to create a column, main axis alignment, center, children, text. What do we want here? We want you have safely reached your destination. And the style is going to be spacepod text styles.page title. Then we're going to have about 34 pixels of space. Then we're going to have a table of some stuff. And we're going to have a launch another pod button. And what's the space there? Let's call it 36 pixels. I've already forgotten. Did I create a text style for buttons? No, I think I just created a color. So that text is 14 bold SF Pro. Probably with a little additional letter spacing. Now, as for this table, what's the easiest way for us to create this? I don't really want to bring an entire table in for this. That seems like overkill. I think what we'll do is just take an overall width. Let's call it like 500. Build audio data table. Actually, I guess we want a row as the primary layout. And then we're going to have expanded child build column. We're going to have 3 columns, but we're going to give them different flex values. So for example, let's do like 2, 2, and 6. 6 for the first, then 2 and 2. Now we want build column, and that's going to take a label and a value. And then we're going to return a column. Text label, we'll need to give it a style. Text value, we'll need to give that a style too. Main axis size is minimum. Cross axis alignment will stretch. Now to the styles. A label is SF Pro bold 10. With a little bit of extra letter spacing. And what was the color? And I guess that's the same for both of them. Okay. And then for the value, it's Comforta. I'm not going to make it bold. I think that's a Figma thing. So Comforta 10. And let's, again, add some letter spacing. We'll try 1, see how it goes. So label value. Destination duration size. Destination duration size. File. Final audio file. Okay. And we will say final audio file path. What's it complaining about here? Okay. Size. Final audio file. Length synchronous. And let's see what size that gives us, the length. I'm guessing this is in bytes. So we divide that by what? How many bytes in a megabyte? Like a million something? How many bytes in a megabyte? Because the design wants megabytes. Okay. Now the duration, unfortunately, I'm going to have to come back and do that later, I think, because duration requires actually using probably FFmpeg to get that value out. So we're going to leave that empty. One more thing, we want the first column to be left aligned and the other two columns to be right aligned, which means we are going to take a text align. And we're going to pass that into each of these text widgets. Okay, and let's do this all one more time. Hot restart, it's logging me in. I need to once again go get the Spaces URL. Now it's downloading the space. The space is downloaded. Let's select an output. And it looks like it copied it that quickly. So here we have the path, no duration for the moment, and we have size. Obviously, I probably want to make this a little bit wider so we can fit more of the path. And then I probably want to truncate the path in some way. Need to add the duration, which probably means using FFmpeg to inspect the audio file. And I should take the size and round it probably to the nearest megabyte. I also need to restart the entire flow when the user says start another pod. And also do maybe a little bit of vertical adjustment on the spacing here. It takes up too much vertical height. But we now have one full end-to-end application implementation, from downloading Chrome tools to signing you in to X, Twitter in the background, to locating the playlist for the audio, to downloading the audio, to copying the audio to the final file location. I'll probably come back and do another brief video where we create this desired little loading animation. Also, we might come back and do these step indicators to let you know how far you are through the process. And then we'll come back and do a bit more of a lengthy video, probably implementing some kind of actual audio editing here where you can maybe chop off the beginning and the end, or maybe even chop off little areas in the middle, kind of the minimum amount of audio editing needed. I'll come back on my own and I'll create a pop-up with some info about why credentials are needed. I'll come back and create some pop-ups for the about SpacePod and authors and support us. Those are things that you guys don't need to worry about. They're designed down here. We might come back together to create this error widget. In fact, we probably will. We'll come back together and we'll figure out how to show errors to the user and what we're going to do in the flows when those things happen. But that's it. Part of one day, and we've built out nearly all the core functionality of a little application, and now I can actually use SpacePod to go download spaces that we produce every single week. Every Wednesday, typically 12 p.m. Pacific, I host a space. We call it Flutter Spaces. You're welcome to come join. You just need to come check out my profile on X/Twitter. You can find me at Super Declarative, SUPR Declarative. And I will be downloading those spaces with this tool so that I can republish those spaces to our podcast, which is called Flutter Spaces. So that's it for today. We'll come back and do some more tactical videos later. And other than that, go ahead and subscribe to the channel because I'll be building a number of tools here, both for me personally and for my various organizations and professional efforts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.